Welcome to today's Hemp Parents podcast, everyone. I'm host Joy Beckerman, and we have a great interview today with decades-long hemp fiber and textile industry Larry Serbin of Hemp Traders. And before we launch into that info-packed conversation, let's share some things on the hemp community's collective conscience this week. So it's definitely on our minds and in our hearts that there are untrained, militarized federal agents in Portland, Oregon right now, kidnapping peaceful protesters. And I'm talking literally plucking them from their lawful, peaceful activities on the street and forcefully taking them against their will in unmarked vans to be detained, assaulted, verbally abused, and for criminal records to be created against them. We're in the United States of America. This is so far beyond violating the U.S. Constitution. It's scary, it's unlawful, it's intolerable, and we should all be incredibly fired up and using our voices on this. And on Friday, July 16th, the Oregon Department of Justice filed a lawsuit against a bunch of federal agencies. The lawsuit actually names the Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Marshal Service, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and the Federal Protective Service, essentially all of the agencies that have had a role in the stepped-up force that's being used against peaceful protesters since early July. But they filed a lawsuit against all of those federal agencies, and they're potentially going to pursue criminal charges against a federal officer who shot a protester in the head with a supposedly non-lethal weapon. I want you to know that this protester was standing peacefully and silently in the street with a boombox over his head, sort of like or exactly like John Cusack in the movie Say Anything. He was shot in the head. This video was captured. It's all over social media and YouTube, and it fractured that protester's skull, requiring surgery. And we actually don't know we're not sure of the prognosis of the recovery, but it specifically names John Does 1 through 10 in this lawsuit as well, because, quote, and this is a quote from the Oregon Department of Justice, the identity of the officers is unknown, nor is their affiliation. Unbelievable that this is the situation that the Oregon Department of Justice is in. Moving on to how to use your voice, let's talk about John Lewis and Good Trouble. Congressman John Lewis, a true hero who has often been called, of course, the conscience of the U.S. Congress and one of the most courageous persons the civil rights movement ever produced, dedicated his life to protecting human rights and securing civil liberties. Despite more than 40 arrests and physical attacks and serious injuries, including, by the way, having his skull fractured as he led 600 peaceful, orderly protesters across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama in 1965, John Lewis remained a dedicated advocate of the philosophy of nonviolence protesting until the moment he transitioned to the other side just last week. So how can you use your voice and how can you use your power for change? And do you want to be encouraged? Do you need to be fired up? I do. We all do. An epic documentary, and this is John Lewis perhaps doing his greatest work posthumously, and he has already done so much for the United States of America with his own human life. In this documentary that was just released called John Lewis, Good Trouble, it's a 101, and it is available for $6.99 for you to rent across a multitude of platforms from Prime Video to YouTube and everything in between. So for $6.99, please get this how-to blueprint on how to use your voice, use your power, and create change in the United States. That's johnlewisgoodtrouble.com, johnlewisgoodtrouble.com. And now, Larry Serbin, our interviewee, our great guest for this episode of Hemp Barons, has been leading the hemp fiber and textile industries and in many ways the hemp oilseed industry for going on 30 years. During that time, he served thousands of volunteer hours organizing people, educating, advocating, and traveling great distances on his own dime to do it. My Lord, is he my brother. Understand here that human beings on the planet Earth who've been able to stick with their original hempen entrepreneurial endeavor consistently for over a quarter of a century can be counted on one hand. And today, for a second time and a year later, Hemp Barons is bringing to you one of those rare humans, Larry Serbin of Hemp Traders, a man of integrity, a shining example of a hemp industry leader, and I am so proud to call him my friend and brother. Let's listen to the master together and have a safe, healthy, inspiring week, and remember to use your voice and use your power every day. Well, hello, Larry Serbin. Thank you so much for being with us again on Hemp Barons today.
Well, thank you, Joy. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, I would have you on the show every 6 months, but there's so much going on. And so glad to have you back in a year after we first interviewed you. Larry, as our listeners may know, you, of course, and Hemp Traders have been the largest purveyors of hemp textiles and hemp fiber in North America and potentially other continents as well. For the last 25 years and growing, you are a lightning rod, you are a prolific industry leader as well as advocate and organizer for the hemp movement and the hemp industries. And it's just so wonderful to have you here. Let me ask you this, Larry. Let's start with textiles. And I understand that there's something pretty exciting that's happening here around hemp and textiles. And before you tell the listeners about this announcement, which I just find absolutely exciting, could you share with us a little bit about kind of the dwindling history or why it is the state of United States textile production in general, whether it's cotton, whether it's another fiber or hemp, but the state of our textile manufacturing here in the United States in general, and then the announcement of what's happening thanks to the reemergence of this crop and people like you.
All right, Joy. I think what you're hinting at is the kind of the status or what's happening with the entire textile industry in the United States. And basically,
Yes, sir.
I would say over the last 30 to 40 years, the textile industry in the U.S. has been diminishing. Basically because the textile industry is very price sensitive. And it is actually cheaper to make textiles in other countries, such as China, India, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Vietnam, where you have labor costs which are much lower. And the main reason for this is that 70% of all textiles that are sold in the apparel industry fall into the price range of what's considered popular price, and that's actually the lowest price. So, for example, Walmart, Kmart, Old Navy, those are the ones that are selling 70% of all the textiles out there, at least for apparel, because let's face it, people don't want to pay too much for clothes. And when you're selling, or buying millions of yards of a fabric, 5 cents per yard really adds up. And of course, it adds up in the final product, whether you're going to pay, say, $5 or $10 for a t-shirt, or you're going to have to pay $20 or $40 for a t-shirt. So what's basically happened is little by little, the textile industry has kind of left, and then it's gone to other countries. My guess is that probably less than 5% of the textile industry is in America, say if we compared it to maybe the year 1950, so the last 70 years.
Is it that the reemergence of this crop may be changing that trajectory and that pattern as we've continued to give our manufacturing away to the competition in other countries for these decades?
Well, one of the things that we've talked about with hemp all the way back to the early 90s and prior is that you can actually make textiles out of hemp. And that is true, but since we were never able to grow hemp in the United States, our company from the very beginning, we've always had to import our hemp textiles from other countries. We've imported it from Romania, from Hungary, from Poland, and from China. And as of now, probably about 98%, maybe 99% of all the hemp textiles are coming from China, basically because they are the ones that are growing hemp, and they have a textile industry there with all the infrastructure. So they're the ones that are basically doing it right now. What's changed in America is that we can now grow hemp for fiber properties, although I might add that probably at least 95 to 98% of the hemp that has been grown in the U.S. so far during the last few years has been grown for flower for CBD. Seems like 2020 is really going to be one of the first years that we aren't going to see hemp being used for textile, or I should say, hemp being grown for fiber. And the big market right away might not be textiles, but basically fiber for non-woven uses. Things like insulation, composites, plastics, paper, things of that nature are probably going to be bigger in the United States than the textiles. But we do have the opportunity possibly to grow the hemp here for fiber for textiles, send it to other countries that do have the infrastructure, and get it spun into yarn, or basically be able to get it spun into yarn that can be used for textiles.
And we're starting to see that infrastructure, as we know, in Kentucky. Eco-Fiber just unveiled quite the fiber processing plant. So it's wonderful that farmers are starting to have infrastructure in place for these other markets, because as we know, and we often say on the show, all this time, of course, we've been asking farmers to grow a crop for which there's very little infrastructure other than extraction technology here, and we've overproduced there. And we've been asking investors to invest in infrastructure for a crop that hasn't really been able to feed that infrastructure other than extraction. And so, having said that, with one foot in front of the other, working in tandem, here it is being built, and it's quite wonderful. Now, obviously, and as you speak all over, you've been just a prolific public speaker and often educate folks about supply chain issues. And of course, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for us to take this heavy, long, strong crop and move it great distances for processing. Certainly, that's what's going on in many regions all over the world. Small places, demographics such as Holland and Germany that actually have the fiber being grown, and China, obviously, as well as the infrastructure in place. But other than that, we're moving the biomass or the raw materials from the biomass great distances. And it's not going to be all that economically viable long term. But of course, folks and industry are doing what they're doing, what is necessary in order to build these markets. And that's fantastic. Somebody has to be the first man or woman in and take those hits. But what is happening right now? Is there an announcement that Hemp Traders has in terms of the availability? Because I know you in particularly, since you're in this industry, it can get exhausting to hear the perfectionists and the idealists, that I should say, going, wow, I really want to make my hemp teepee. And then they find out that the canvas from that hemp teepee came from China. And now all of a sudden they're like, oh, I don't want hemp from China. Well, then I guess you're not going to get hemp canvas, because guess what? It's mostly coming from China. What's the difference now? What kind of development is happening here in this fantastic 2020 year of transformation?
Right. Well, Joy, I am pleased to announce that Hemp Traders has started making some hemp textiles here in the United States. I'm just beginning to get it going. We've made one fabric in particular. In fact, we're going to be picking it up today, beautiful rib knit fabric. And I have 3 other jersey fabrics in the works right now that will probably be ready in about a week or 2. Now, these are actually being knitted in Los Angeles and finished in Los Angeles. Although, for full disclosure, at this time, we do have to import the yarns from China. But I like to see this as a first step to allowing the American and domestic production of hemp textiles.
It's actually an emotional moment for me to hear that, and for the listeners to really understand the impact of what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
We're not only talking about getting a return of textile manufacturing to the United States of America, we're talking about hemp textile manufacturing. Larry, you are really something, brother. This is a tremendous first step. And I really thought that this announcement, you were going to tell me it was some basic weave, just one. And you're basically telling me, and correct me if I've misheard you, 4 different blends, 3 of which are jerseys, or did I miss something?
No, you said it right. I was just trying it out to see if we could do it. And the first fabric I made, I figured I might as well try something that I just can't get in China due to the type of machinery that they have. So we went with what I would call a very thick rib knit fabric, and it was able to get made. But then the most surprising thing was when we got it made, I realized it was not very expensive getting it made here. And I figured, well, wait a minute, that opens up the door to some other fabrics. So I decided to do the three most popular fabrics we sell are hemp jersey fabrics. So we have it in three different weights. So I dropped it off some yarn at the knitters a few weeks ago, and it just heard back yesterday. And it looks like not only are we going to be able to make them here, but it's going to be cheaper than what we can get from China.
I'm sorry, guys. I've got every hair is standing on end.
Yeah.
I did not expect this story to get better. Wow, that is absolutely phenomenal to hear, Larry. We're talking about economic permaculture in general. That's fantastic. And while we're on that subject, could you give the listeners some examples of the different types of products that folks would make with those different types of jerseys?
All right. Well, we're basically talking apparel type fabrics. So your most basic item that jersey is used for would be a T-shirt. All T-shirts are made out of jersey fabric, sometimes a rib knit fabric. But so for example, long sleeve T-shirt, short sleeve T-shirt, T-shirt with a pocket. You can even on the heavier ones, you can do some pants probably with it, or very very lightweight sweatpants, or a very lightweight sort of hoodie can be made out of it. It's very versatile. You can use it for many, many different items.
And then the lighter weight jersey, and it's true, jersey was not the greatest example of the tremendous diversity of textiles that you have available for basically every application, from heavy industrial sort of upholstery right on down to the finest silk hemp blends for a beautiful wedding ceremony. But in terms of the thinner jersey, just so we could sort of showcase the American-made textiles that you are manufacturing historically here, post-prohibition historically, I should say. And the lighter weight jerseys, what are some things that people would use for the lighter weight? It seems to me maybe an obvious thing might be something more feminine because it might hang differently.
A little bit. I mean, we're still looking at, if you think jerseys, still think of a T-shirt, and you can think of a very thin, lightweight T-shirt, regular T-shirt, or a beefy tee. So what we're doing is we're creating the fabric to fit all three of those niches right there. So, something for summer, something for maybe fall, spring, and then possibly a heavier one for the winter time.
Attention Cannabis Podcast listeners. You can now listen to your favorite cannabis podcast ad-free with the MJBulls mobile app. Just download the free MJBulls mobile app to your smartphone to start enjoying cannabis podcasts with no commercials. Go to Apple Apps or Google Play to get the MJBulls Cannabis Podcast app today.
Wow. And then I realized too, how can we sit here and talk about textiles knowing that we've got new listeners every single week here for Hemp Barons without discussing why choose hemp fabric and hemp blended fabric over another type of textile. And Larry, there is nobody in the world better able to describe the main bullet points of why choose hemp to wear over another fabric than you. So let us have it.
All right. Thank you for bringing that up, Joy. Yes, I'm well versed in this field. And basically, hemp is a fiber, is the strongest of all the natural fibers that are out there. So when you weave it into a textile, whether alone or in a blend, you end up with a much stronger item, something that's going to be more durable and last a lot longer time. Not only that, but if you were to look at the fiber under a microscope, you would see that the fiber is actually hollow, and that allows for the free flow of air Therefore, when you wear a hemp garment, it's much more breathable than other garments you might wear. Cotton is certainly much better than synthetic garments. Along with that, it allows more absorption from water, can absorb more water. Therefore, if you were to perspire in the garment, it's going to absorb that. And it allows for more surface area for dye to bind to. So if you are to dye this particular fabric, you're going to get a lot richer, brighter colors in the hemp that are going to hold on a lot longer than other different textiles. Also, because it has a free flow of air, it inhibits the growth of anaerobic bacteria, and that causes the fabric to have antibacterial properties. When people perspire, the aroma or the odor of perspiration is not actually the water or the perspiration, but it's actually anaerobic bacteria that begin to grow in it. And if you inhibit the growth of anaerobic bacteria, you lower the smell of the item when you're wearing it. So when you wear hemp clothes, they're going to have less of an odor if you were to perspire in them. Hemp. One other thing about hemp is that it has one of the lowest, the term is percent elongation. That means if you were to put a lot of pressure on it and try to pull the fiber apart, it's not going to stretch at all before it will break. It's strong, so it takes a lot of effort to break it, but there's going to be no stretch. And this makes it great for items like upholstery when you want to pull the fabric tight, but if it gets jumped on or sat on for a long time, it's not going to unravel or stretch out and become loose over a period of time.
It's and even then you could keep going. I mean, it literally just keeps on going. In fact, we hear this phrase a lot when we talk about hemp textiles, Larry, and that is hemp doesn't wear out, it wears in. Could you explain to the listeners what that means?
All right. Well, what that means is if you were to take 100% hemp and compare it to other natural fibers, it's most closely related to linen. And what happens is when you begin to wear it, it gets more of a worn-in feel to it. I like to compare it to a piece of paper. If you were to take a piece of paper and fold it in half and then look at it, you're going to have a crease in it. If you fold it in half again, you're going to have another crease. If you fold it again, you're going to have another crease. But if you were to take that piece of paper and crinkle it up, the whole thing in your hands, and kind of mash it around, and then unravel it, you'll notice the paper now feels kind of limp and soft. And the hemp fibers, fabrics, and yarns behave the same way. Therefore, as you wear it, as you wash it, as you live in it, it tends to get a lot more softer and more comfortable to wear.
It's just amazing, and it keeps you warm in the winter, keeps you cool in the summer.
Yes.
Well, Hemp Traders does so very much, and of course I wanted to make sure that we spent plenty of time on the textile aspect of the Hemp Traders enterprise, particularly in that this post-prohibition historic effort is not only occurring, it's successful and it's economical. So that's just fantastic. Of course, you sell all of the raw fibers, and over these years, as we've educated, and as you well know, just as intimately as the rest of us advocates that have knocked on every single door in every state legislature for years and educating with these things, we could only get these raw fibers from you. You sell all of the different types of bast, the outer bark, of course, of the stalk, as well as the hurd, the inner woody core. You sell degummed fiber, of course, that is delineated fiber, all of those things. And another incredible innovation that you have undertaken here to open up these markets, again, the fiber markets being the trillion-dollar markets, along with the oilseed, far outside of extraction and cannabinoids, which we love and are so grateful for. is hemp board. And that is through your division, Canagrove. Could you explain to us, we of course, for all of these years prior to Canagrove being born into the United States of America, thanks to your hard work, Larry, we have had to import hemp board mostly from China over the years. And again, there's a carbon footprint and price involved in shipping essentially hemp plywood. I don't like to say that, but it helps people get sort of an idea of what it looks like, even though it behaves differently than plywood. But then what happened was the supply chain, even within China, became disrupted in the fairly recent past, and the shipments became inconsistent and not made the same way and made poorly. And so that really put us in a bind, because now we didn't even have a choice, the poor choice of getting the hemp board shipped across the ocean in containers to us from China. How did Canagrove come to be? And if you could just maybe talk to us about the various sizes that you offer, particularly after a full run's been done.
All right. Well, I'll speak a little bit more about the history that you mentioned. All the hemp board that has been sold commercially over the past 15 years was actually produced by us. It was, me and my company making it. And you are right. Since we weren't growing hemp in the United States, my first supply of hemp board had to come from China. And I went to different factories, and we had the board made, and we were able to bring it over. The problem that I ran into initially was they were using formaldehyde binders, or urea formaldehyde binders, and we found out right away that nobody wanted the formaldehyde in their board. We were trying to sell an environmental product. So it took me another couple of years. It took me about another year, and I found a low formaldehyde binder for the board, and we brought that in, but we found out that even the low formaldehyde binder, people didn't want that. They didn't want any formaldehyde at all. So then I had to spend another year or two finding the right kind of binder. We bought it from South Africa, brought it to China, made another batch of boards, got them put together, and began to sell them. We were the first to have a non-formaldehyde binder that we were working with. And the business began to take off. And then I ran into the problem that the factory that I was working with went out of business. And it had nothing to do with me. It had to do with the fact that I was working with some smaller factories in China that were willing to work with me to make the board. And there was a time in China where there was a lot of consolidation going on, and the smaller factories weren't able to compete with the larger ones. So a bunch of the littler ones went out of business. So, and another factory to make the board, that one went out of business. And, I was doing well. I was selling all the boards we had, and I was even approached by Home Depot, who wanted to add the hemp board to their stores. But I actually had to tell them no, because I just couldn't get a hold of a constant supply of it. I just couldn't bring it in the way they would want it. So finally, after about 4 or 5 factories went out of business, I just decided to put the whole idea on hold until sometime in the future where we might be able to do it here. Now, fortunately, we legalized hemp at the end of 2018. And I was able to start manufacturing the hemp boards here in the U.S. And we were able to get them made, bring them in. The quality is great. The properties of them are perfect. The biggest stumbling block right now happens to be more with the logistics, because the factory that I use is not near any location where they're growing the hemp. And more than half of the cost of making the boards was just shipping the raw materials from where it was grown to the factory in order to make it. And now we're at the point where we're looking for newer suppliers of hemp stalks and hemp fiber to be able to make the boards much more cost competitive. And that's kind of where we're at right now.
What a journey, and just the absolute love of hemp that one must have to go through all of this over. I think I've been saying, by the way, a quarter of a century for a couple of years now. So I think we're past a quarter of a century. Just amazing. Again, the purpose-driven life that you live, Larry, to really deliver not just on the promise of hemp. We're talking about the true chopping of the wood and carrying of the water to bring these incredibly valuable industries, these job creating, planetary healing, product improving industries back to the United States. It's absolutely phenomenal. And on that note, people come because you are a lightning rod and because you are the supplier of so many of the raw materials and finished goods and finished textiles, etc., that folks need in order to be able to execute their ideas with hemp. I know that you of course are aware of so many emerging things, and certainly you can't share most of it with us, but is there anything exciting on the horizon here that you're able to share, or something that you find particularly interesting that you might be able to share?
Yeah, I was just recently able to finally procure powdered hemp hurd. I'm sure you're familiar with hemp hurds. We use it to make hempcrete, and we also use it for our boards. But I finally found a way to get it powderized. And that is going to be the beginning point for people who want to blend the hemp hurds with plastic. So we're going to be able to see the advent of more hemp plastic components, whether it's the little hemp pellet or plastic pellets that people will then be able to use to make other products from hemp, including plastic 3D printers.
Wow, fantastic! And I guess the other thing, in its rawest form, my understanding, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, is that powdered hurd is also great because we know how absorbent it is to be used as a commercial or industrial absorbent, including around oil rigs, which hopefully we will replace as a source of fuel with hemp itself. But have you heard of it as an absorbent?
Yes, the most obvious one would be just not necessarily powdered hemp hurd, but maybe finer particles of hemp hurd being used for animal bedding. So, for example, in a horse stall or small mammal bedding, because when they defecate, pee or poop, the hemp hurds are able to absorb it all, and then it makes it very easy to kind of pick it up and throw it away.
Indeed, and I even understand that then that hemp hurd, soiled as it is with the defecation of the animals, in and of itself makes a great compost or other a great permaculture addition and soil amendment in any event.
Right, yeah, because what you're basically dealing with is just cellulose. It's going to be somewhat similar to wood chips, but it's a little bit softer, so it's probably more biodegradable than regular wood.
Wow. Okay. Just and that of course is just a great first market. Hemp hurd alone, grow the fiber, decorticate it, and I understand we have enough challenges alone just with decortication. And for the listeners who maybe haven't heard that term, we sort of in the fiber world live and breathe the term decortication. That's the term for separating that outer bark, which we call the bast fiber of the stalk, from that inner woody core, and then you're left with the separated bast and hurd, and then that hurd needs to be processed a little bit further. If for hempcrete, as you know, Larry, from looking at so many different types of processed hurd, it does need to be further processed to a specific technical specification. Now, it's not rocket science. It needs to be a particular geometric particle range, of course, a particular moisture content, not difficult, and make sure there isn't a ton of bast or chaff in there. And so it's just a great market to be able to decorticate, process. The animal bedding does not need really any of those specifications, although different animals of different sizes may, of course, have preference or sensitivity in their paws, etc., versus a horse for the size. But it is just a fantastic first market, and all of that can be purchased at Hemp Traders, along with, of course, the grain, which we'll save for the next time we have you on, Larry. And all of the various textiles, every type of diameter of hemp rope you could imagine, from the thickest to the thinnest twine and webbing. And before we go, Larry, is there anything on the horizon? And this powdered hemp, of course, it may have already taken up that category, but anything else on the horizon for hemp traders that you want to share, or anything in particular that you want to make sure that the listeners hear about the emerging hemp industries in general before we part?
Well, I'd like to say that probably the biggest market for hemp will be in the fiber. The flower was always kind of a low-hanging fruit. It was something that just about anyone could get into and could grow it and would be able to sell it. Seed would be number two, but then, the more difficult thing is the fiber because, one, in order to make it viable, you have to grow quite a lot of acres of it, have large amounts and a large volume. And along with that, you need the infrastructure to, as you mentioned, corticate, separate the fibers. And then you also need the infrastructure that will be able to cut the fibers or reduce the fibers to specific fiber lengths. And the most exciting thing is that is exactly where we're heading. Little by little, more farmers are starting to grow for fiber. They're starting to learn how to cultivate it, how to harvest it, how to break it up. I'm working with some people that are working in some very innovative ways of doing decortication and reduction on the fibers to get the hemp fibers almost uniform, very close to what you might have with synthetic fibers. When we hit that level and it's all up and running, it's going to allow hemp and the fibers to enter a number of markets, many, many different markets. And if we grow it on a large enough scale, these are going to be very cost competitive with petroleum fibers and other synthetic fibers.
Phenomenal. And I realize now that we haven't gone down the list that I love so much, so I'm just going to say it. When we're talking about hemp fiber, among many, many products, we are talking about paper, textiles, building materials, biocomposites, nanotechnology, even energy and fuel when we are talking about that stock. It is a game changer of game changers. Larry Serbin, my brother, it is always so wonderful to be able to speak with you. You will be on this show again. And folks, please, you want to know how to get in touch with Larry at Hemp Traders, go to MJBulls.com and check it out, or Google this man and get what you need from Hemp Traders. Larry, thank you for everything you do for hemp every single day.
Thank you so much for all you do, Joy, and all the long time and a lot of work that you've done for hemp as well.
You know I love it. You know I love it. Thanks again, Larry. Stay healthy.
All right. Thank you, Joy. You too.
Thank you for listening to today's show. Before you leave, we want to invite you to hang out for a couple minutes to listen to our newest podcast. As the industry's only exclusive cannabis podcast network, we are constantly adding new shows, and that's why we're so excited to welcome Women Leading in Cannabis to the MJBulls Cannabis Podcast Network. Join host Kira Reed each week for raw, inspiring, and real conversations with women leading the worldwide cannabis industry.
Tell me, boy, you make me so bored. You need to walk the other way. I tell you once more. Please get out of my way. I don't want you no more. We're done here, boy. I know you think you're so fine, but you can't see it. I've been wanting to unwind.
Hi, my name is Kira Reed, and I'd like to invite you to be inspired by the women who are leading in the cannabis industry. Each week, We will discuss empowerment, leadership, and what it means to be a woman in charge in marijuana, hemp, and CBD. As the founder of the Women Empowered in Cannabis community, I have had the great pleasure to get to know many brilliant and talented women who are CEOs, executives, politicians, advocates, and community leaders that are focused on creating a cannabis economy that is just, fair, and equal. We'll learn how these women make decisions, how they navigate a predominantly male industry, and what they're doing to level the playing field for women. I hope you'll join us.